I don't think I know anyone who wakes up in the morning and, actively tries to make their life miserable.
It sounds ridiculous when you say it out
Oh, it
loud.
does. But it sets the stage for this deep dive perfectly.
It really does, because the goal is so universal. You want to be content, you want healthy relationships, you want enough resources, and you want some respect. We all have that sort of golden vignette of existence we're aspiring to.
Absolutely. We're all chasing meaningful lives, joy, the chance to use our talents. But here's the massive paradox that we found running through all the sources you shared with us.
Mhm.
We think the problem isn't defining a good life. That part feels intuitive. It's achieving it. We believe the distance between where we are and where we want to be is just bad luck, or not enough money, or a lack of self-discipline.
That's the default narrative, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tell ourselves, I would be happy if only I had X, Y, or Z. The key ingredient always feels like it's external, or at least out of our immediate control.
Which leads to what the sources called guaranteed discontent. Because we so rarely stop to actually examine what makes a good life in the first place, we're running on these vague, culturally imported notions of success and happiness.
And if your plan is murky, the sources are very clear. Your outcome is almost certainly going to be dissatisfaction.
Right.
And we also have to recognize that the definition of a good life is, well, it's fluid. What it means to you today will naturally change tomorrow because you are changed by time and experience. But that core search, that's an integral part of the human journey.
So wisdom is out there.
The wisdom is there to clarify the path, but, accessing it requires genuine work. It takes courage to seek it out.
It sounds like we're saying the wisdom is available, but maybe we don't know where to look, or
Yeah.
or perhaps we just don't like what the wisdom is telling us.
That's a great way to put it. We have to clear away the foundation first.
Okay.
So let's dig into the surprising root of unhappiness, because that's really the starting point.
Okay, this is where the material gets really sharp. The core mechanism of unhappiness across all these varied sources, I mean, from modern psychology to ancient texts, it stems from just two things:
Right.
failed expectations and a gross misunderstanding of reality.
Think of it as a mechanism of self-sabotage, but it's one we are, culturally incentivized to use. The sources emphasize how easy it is to live an unhappy life that's just defined by those failed expectations.
And these are just minor disappointments.
No, not at all. These are usually expectations about the pace of your career or the nature of a romantic partnership or even the fairness of the economy.
And there's a strange, almost dark comfort in that misery, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
It allows people to wallow and maintain this sense of moral superiority. To say, look, I did everything I was supposed to do. I got the degree, I worked hard, I checked all the boxes, and the reward was withheld.
Wow. So they get to hold the high ground for being miserable. It's the story we tell ourselves to avoid taking radical responsibility for our own internal state.
So the prescription for contentment is what? The radical opposite of that.
It is. It means performing a really difficult inventory, carefully examining every single belief, every expectation and assumption you hold, and then discarding what demonstrably doesn't work and keeping only what yields fruit in your actual life.
So the goal isn't necessarily instant joy. The goal is to unburden yourself from the noise, the cultural debt, all the false expectations.
And when you do that kind of radical clearing, happiness, or at the very least a stable, abiding contentment, that's what remains.
But that's hard.
That's right. Choosing to live this way is intensely difficult work. It is challenging, it's rewarding, and it's necessary. The sources bring in some ancient wisdom here, citing that difficult truth from Scripture.
How narrow is the gate?
And restricted is the way that leads to life. Few are those who find it.
Wow, I mean, that sounds almost discouraging. If the path is so narrow and restricted, how does the average person even find the instructions?
Well, the point isn't to discourage. It's to stress that this path is not the default. It requires real effort to live rightly, consistently, and, against the prevailing currents.
So the difficulty isn't intellectual.
No, it's one of commitment. You have to commit to doing the work that's necessary to maintain that clear path.
Okay, that brings us to the next logical point, which is a bit more encouraging. The sheer abundance of available wisdom. If the path is narrow, at least the instructions are plentiful.
They are.
I mean, ideas on how to live a good life were explored by ancient Greek philosophers, like the Stoics. Spiritual traditions add layers of depth. We see miserable lives transformed daily by something as pragmatic as addiction recovery programs. And now,
Modern science. Positive cytology continues the whole discussion with concrete data. What's so fascinating here is that the knowledge is completely available to anyone with the courage to seek it.
Which brings up the question.
Right. If we have all these comprehensive answers spanning thousands of years, why are so many people still just stumbling along, eternally yearning?
That's the paradox of availability. The sources brought up Jonathan Field's observation in his book, How to Live a Good Life. He notes that the wisdom exists, from the Stoics to the Buddha, from faith to neuroscience. I mean, truly little remains unstudied about constructing a good life.
Yet, look around. Humanity is struggling. The problem isn't the lack of answers. We've had them for millennia. The problem is access and translation.
So how do the sources break down those barriers? What are the specific reasons we can't just integrate Stoicism or Buddhist principles into a modern life?
The material outlines 3 core barriers that make the things that work so inaccessible. First, they are just utterly engulfed in a vast sea of noise.
You mean the endless flow of clickbait, self-help, contradictory advice on social media, the marketing telling you the good life is a product you can buy?
Precisely. You have to shout over all the marketing and the quick fixes just to hear the consistent millennial-old truths. The second barrier is that the truly helpful concepts are often too hard to find or validate amid that chaos.
You don't know if the ancient text you're reading even applies to your life as, say, a parent in a modern capitalist society.
Exactly. And finally, they can be too complicated, too theoretical, or, and this is critical, too mired in dogma that conflicts with the reality of our lives.
That is a huge point.
Take Stoicism, for example. It offers incredible mental frameworks, but its original application was in a non-capitalist, slave-owning society. The philosophy of radical acceptance of fate suddenly clashes with the modern reality that a lot of our suffering is man-made and changeable through action.
So you have to extract the core wisdom while leaving the outdated dogma behind.
You have to.
So we have the maps, but they're buried under a mountain of cheap paperbacks and written in this confusing mix of archaic and overly technical language. No wonder we all feel like we're stumbling along.
And that realization forces us to separate 2 concepts we are constantly mixing up: a good life and happiness.
A key distinction.
We have to make it here. While happiness and living a good life are intertwined, they are definitively not equivalent. If you treat them as the same thing, you're aiming at the wrong target.
So if happiness isn't the goal, what is it?
Well, happiness, by its very definition, I think Merriam-Webster calls it a state of well-being and contentment, is fundamentally fickle and fleeting.
It's a transient state.
It's an emotion, like sadness or frustration, and emotions are designed to change. This is the unspoken truth the sources demand we accept.
That normalization process, the hedonic adaptation, is brutal. You get the promotion, the new car, and within weeks or months, that peak joy just becomes the new normal.
Exactly. The human mind adapts very quickly to positive circumstances. What made you ecstatic today will simply be the baseline tomorrow. So if you pin your entire life's philosophy on an emotion that is biologically designed to dissipate, you are setting yourself up for inevitable disappointment.
Accepting that transience is the first step.
A vital first step towards psychological growth.
Okay, this is where the modern science part becomes so fascinating and frankly a little challenging. We often feel like our circumstances dictate everything, but the sources point to a famous model about the drivers of happiness that totally flips that script.
This model is cited all the time in positive psychology, and it's critical. It suggests that a massive 50% of your current happiness level is genetically set. That's your baseline, your emotional thermostat.
That leaves 50% that is theoretically movable. And here's the shocking part. Only 10% of that happiness equation is determined by life circumstances.
Things like your income, material wealth, relationship status.
Only 10%.
That's the data point that requires real attention. If you're wealthy, married, and healthy, those circumstances only account for 1/10 of your overall happiness potential. The other 40%, that is the critical segment.
And that's determined by your own choices.
Your own choices, specific activities, and intentional effort.
Okay, let's inject a little challenge here because I know you, the listener, are thinking this. If circumstances are only 10%, why does it feel like a financial struggle or a health crisis dictates 90% of life? How do the sources reconcile that feeling with the data?
That is a great question, and it speaks directly to that misunderstanding of reality we talked about earlier. The sources reconcile this by explaining that the 10% feels like 90% when the circumstances are negative.
Ah.
Being in a difficult circumstance can inhibit your ability to engage with the 40%. It consumes your bandwidth, your energy, the time needed for those intentional choices.
So the goal isn't necessarily to become rich, but to achieve enough stability in that 10% area so you have the psychological space and energy to fully execute on the 40%.
Precisely. You need to clear the noise of survival so you can focus on the choices of thriving. That 40% is the essential finding. Your consistent, intentional choices directly affect nearly half of your potential experience of life.
That makes the work feel much more valuable. So if we connect this 40% factor to the overall goal, the source material argues that happiness should be viewed strictly as a byproduct.
Correct. Not the end goal itself.
It's not the destination.
It's the result of traveling correctly. Happiness is presented as the result of living rightly and well. And this is why the sources characterize happiness as being more ethical than psychological.
We need to break that term down immediately. What does ethical mean in this context?
It means it's about structure and action, not about feeling. It's about building a robust internal framework based on repeatable actions, committed habits and values. That's the ethical framework. Rather than just waiting for a positive emotion, the psychological state, to spontaneously arrive.
So it's a predictable yield of right action.
Yes. Instead of thinking, I need to feel happier, the shift is to, what good action can I take right now that aligns with my values?
You focus on the structure of a good life, that 40% of effort, and the happiness follows as a natural, though transient, reward.
Exactly. You increase your chances for physical and mental health, better relationships, and yes, financial success too. You gain the ability to be happy.
That distinction, that happiness is the byproduct, not the objective. That's what clarifies the path. It requires clear and consistent action.
It does.
And the source material asserts that, with rare exceptions, you can be happy if you choose to be, but that choice means committing to the work of that 40%.
It shifts the focus from passively waiting for circumstance, which is the 10%, or just relying on your natural disposition, the 50%, to actively engaging in what the sources define as the work of living.
Okay, we've covered the philosophical paradox, the scientific data, and that core distinction. Let's bring this analysis home for you, the learner. We established that a good life isn't defined by luck or external circumstance.
Which accounts for only 10%.
Right. But by clearing away the noise of false expectations and recognizing that the maps to contentment have been available for millennia, even if they're often poorly translated for modern life.
And most critically, we know that 40% of the potential for happiness is directly related to your intentional choices and activities. Living a good life, therefore, requires consistent, dedicated action.
We began by noting that the problem isn't defining a good life, but achieving it. But now we see that achieving it simply means committing to the actions that lead to it. Given that 40% of your potential happiness is controlled by specific choices, and that happiness is a result of living rightly, well, this raises an important question for you.
If the ultimate goal is not the transient feeling of happiness itself, but the commitment to the work of living rightly, what is the first conscious, specific action you will take tomorrow to honor that commitment? What does the work, that crucial 40%, look like for you in practice?